It was a freezing night in New York, the kind of cold that bites at your skin and turns every breath into a ghostly mist in the icy air. As Barron Trump passed through the intersection of 34th Street and 7th Avenue, something in the shadows caught his eye, making him do a double take. There, in the dim glow of a secluded alley, a frail woman sat curled up, buried beneath layers of tattered blankets. Without hesitation, he instructed his driver to stop, the gentle hum of the engine breaking the eerie stillness of the night. How often do we walk past others without truly noticing them? The thought lingered in his mind. Little did he realize, this moment was about to reshape his entire outlook on life. Stepping out of the car, his polished leather shoes crunched against the thin sheet of snow beneath him. As he moved closer, the sharp blend of icy air and the city's lingering decay grew stronger, but it was the look on her face, one of sheer desperation, that struck him the hardest. Then her weary eyes lifted, locking onto his. A flicker of recognition passed through her weathered features. "Helen?" His voice wavered, heart pounding as a flood of memories rushed in. It seemed almost impossible. Was this truly the same woman who had once been his comfort through childhood fears? The sight of her, fragile and lost in the cold, sent a wave of disbelief through him. Helen's trembling hands clutched a filthy blanket as she peered up at him, confusion and shock written all over her face. "Barron?" Her voice, barely more than a whisper, nearly disappeared into the icy wind, but the emotion within it was undeniable. In that instant, vivid images of the past crashed over him. He could see it so clearly, the time she had cared for him, the warmth and patience she had once given so freely. Helen had been his rock in the most uncertain moments of his life, unwavering love. Yet now, seeing her like this, left him shaken. How could someone so strong, so important, have ended up here? The wind howled, making her clutch the tattered blanket even tighter as she lowered her gaze, ashamed. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she murmured. Barron's chest tightened, a storm of guilt and concern crashing inside him. He didn't know the full story, not yet, but one thing was certain. He couldn't just walk away. "Come with me," he said softly, fighting back the overwhelming emotions threatening to spill over. And so, the journey to uncover her story began. Inside the car, the steady hum of the heater wrapped them in warmth. Helen, still trembling from the cold, held the cup of coffee Barron had handed her, her fingers barely steady. The silence between them was thick, but the pain in her weary eyes spoke louder than words. "I lost everything," she whispered, her voice nearly swallowed by the engine's low rumble. Barron studied her face, his mind racing with a single question. How had someone who had once meant so much to him ended up like this? At first, her words were hesitant, but soon they poured out like a flood she could no longer hold back. "After I left your home, I tried to start over. I found a tiny apartment in Los Angeles, took cleaning jobs, and started saving. I even let myself dream about a peaceful future." Her voice wavered, reliving the memories. But then, the fire. Her breath hitched. "One night, everything I had, gone, turned to ash." Her words cut deep, and Barron felt the weight of her pain as if it were his own. He listened, his heart aching with every heartbreaking detail. Helen explained how, without insurance or support, the streets had become her only option. At first, you tell yourself you'll find a way out. But then, one door after another slams shut. And before you know it, you start losing faith, she admitted, her gaze locked on her trembling hands in her lap. "The worst part," she exhaled, voice barely above a whisper. "It's not the cold, not even the hunger. It's the loneliness, the silence of being invisible." Her confession sent a wave of emotions crashing over Barron, ones he struggled to put into words. "You can't imagine what it's like to live without hope, Barron," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of sorrow and shame. He swallowed hard, guilt and helplessness swelling inside him. As the car neared the hotel he had arranged for her, Barron couldn't shake one agonizing thought. How had he failed to see the suffering of someone who had once been his anchor? Outside, the city seemed to be asleep. But inside, his mind raced, a newfound determination taking root. He needed to understand the depths of her pain. Inside the warmth of the hotel room, Helen hesitated, her eyes sweeping over the elegant decor, as if she didn't belong. The contrast between this space and the harsh streets she had called home for years. Now, surrounded by warmth, it all felt overwhelming. Gently, Barron guided her to a chair and placed a plate of food in front of her. "Please eat something," he urged, his voice both kind and firm. Helen hesitated, her hands trembling as she picked up the fork. "You don't have to do this for me," she whispered, her voice a mix of gratitude and lingering shame. "But I do," Barron replied, his gaze steady. "You've done more for me than I ever realized." As steam curled from the meal in front of her, Helen slowly began to open up about life on the streets. "Skid Row. It's not a place you live. It's a place you survive," she said, her words thick with emotion. "Every day is a fight. For food, for safety, even just for a small piece of sidewalk to call your own." Her voice faltered, her gaze dropping to her hands. "You start to feel like you're not even human anymore, just a shadow people avoid." Barron listened in silence, his chest tightening with every word. She described the moments that had crushed her spirit, the nights spent shivering in the freezing cold, the countless faces that looked right through her, the ever-present fear of danger. But then her voice broke. "The worst part," she murmured, her breath unsteady, "it's realizing no one is coming to help. You're just forgotten." Barron's heart ached as he watched her eyes glisten with unshed tears. He wanted to tell her she wasn't forgotten, that she mattered, but somehow words felt so small compared to the weight of her pain. Instead, he reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand, offering silent comfort. Helen's eyes searched his, looking for reassurance. "I've been in survival mode for so long. I don't even know how to hope anymore," she admitted. Barron nodded, his resolve strengthening. "Then let's take it one step at a time," he said softly. "Hope can wait. For now, we focus on getting you back on your feet." A faint smile tugged at her lips, but the uncertainty in her eyes remained. Barron knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much to uncover. Morning sunlight spilled through the hotel room curtains, casting a golden glow over Helen as she stirred awake. For a moment, she lay still, savoring the unfamiliar softness of the bed beneath her. The contrast was stark, so different from the cold, unyielding pavement she had known for so long. In the small sitting area, Barron was already waiting, a cup of coffee steaming in his hands. "Good morning, Helen." He greeted her with a gentle smile. "Today, we take the first steps toward a fresh start." She nodded, though doubt still flickered in her tired eyes. As they sat together over breakfast, Barron asked a question that caught her completely off guard. "If you could do anything, Helen, what would it be?" Her fork froze midair. She stared at him, then shook her head. "I don't know, Barron," she admitted, her voice almost apologetic. "When you've spent years just trying to survive, dreaming feels like a luxury you can't afford." That hit him hard. For Barron, dreaming was second nature. For Helen, it had become nothing more than a distant memory. Then, slowly, she began to share more, about the fire that had turned her world upside down. "It all happened so fast," she murmured, her expression distant. "One moment I was asleep. The next, I woke up to the smell of smoke and the sound of everything I owned being destroyed." Her voice trembled, fists clenching as she relived the memory. In one night, I lost it all. My home, my belongings. Every sense of stability I had. Barron could only imagine the fear, the helplessness she must have felt, and the thought of it made his heart ache. "Helen," he said gently, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "We can't change the past, but we can change what comes next." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. I don't want to disappoint you," she whispered. He shook his head firmly. "You couldn't. The only real disappointment would be if I didn't try to help you." His words hung in the air as they finished their meal, both lost in thought, contemplating the road ahead. But Barron couldn't shake the question that had haunted him since he found her. How had someone who once meant so much been cast aside so easily? While Helen rested at the hotel, he made a call to his mother's assistant, determined to uncover the truth. The answer he received left him reeling. "It was a practical decision," the assistant said dismissively. "Your mother simply didn't feel she needed Helen anymore." The cold detachment in those words hit Barron like a punch to the gut, igniting a mix of frustration and guilt. That evening, he confronted his mother in her opulent Manhattan penthouse. Seated across from her in a room filled with luxury, he didn't hold back. Helen wasn't just an employee. She was family. She gave everything to take care of me. His mother, sipping tea with effortless composure, avoided his gaze. "Things changed," she replied curtly. "We had to move on." Barron's voice edged higher. "Move on? She lost everything, and you didn't even look back." Meanwhile, Helen had never spoken about the way she was let go, whether out of pride or to shield Barron from the truth. She had locked that chapter of her life away. But now that he knew, Barron's perspective shifted completely. He realized that while he couldn't undo what had been done, he could take responsibility for what came next. For the first time, he saw the stark divide between his life of privilege and the struggles of those who had quietly sacrificed for him. That night, as Helen sat by the hotel window, gazing at the city lights, Barron returned, his face etched with both determination and sorrow. Sitting across from her, he spoke softly. "Helen, why didn't you ever tell me what happened after you left?" Her eyes softened, and with a heavy sigh, she whispered, "You were just a boy, Barron. It wasn't your burden to carry." Her selflessness only strengthened his resolve. He couldn't change her past, but he was determined to shape a future filled with hope. The next morning, Barron woke up with a plan, one that went beyond just offering Helen temporary relief. He wanted to rebuild her life, step by step. With just a few calls, he assembled a team, doctors to assess her health, lawyers to explore any reparations she might be owed, social workers to help guide her toward stability. Sitting in the hotel's lounge, Helen watched the flurry of activity, her expression caught between awe and disbelief. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked, her voice laced with vulnerability. "Because you did so much for me, when I couldn't do anything for myself," he replied. The doctors were direct. Years of hardship had taken their toll. Helen suffered from respiratory issues, malnutrition, untreated injuries that had worsened over time. Yet, there was hope. With proper care, she can recover, one doctor assured them. Hearing this, Helen's shoulders sagged with relief, though uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. "I don't want to be a burden," she murmured. Barron leaned forward, his voice steady. Firmly, Barron shook his head. "Helen, you're not a burden. You're a reminder of what it means to never give up." As Helen embarked on her journey to recovery, her resilience became a source of inspiration for those around her. Nurses spoke of her quiet strength, lawyers grew deeply invested in her case, and even Barron found his own perspective shifting. His understanding of privilege, responsibility, It was evolving with every step. One afternoon, he looked at her and said, "Helen, you're showing people what it truly means to fight through the impossible." She met his gaze, a soft smile forming on her lips. "I didn't think I had any fight left," she admitted. Maybe I do." Yet, beneath it all, Helen carried a secret, one she hadn't yet shared. One evening, as the city lights flickered beyond the window, she hesitated before speaking. "Barron, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. It's about something that happened a long time ago." Her voice faltered, uncertainty flashing in her eyes. "Not now, but soon." Barron, though curious, nodded respectfully. Whatever it was, he would wait. For now, his focus remained on helping Helen reclaim her dignity, one day at a time. Her progress had been remarkable, but Barron could sense something still weighed heavy on her heart. One crisp afternoon, as they sat on a bench in Central Park, autumn leaves drifting gently around them, Helen took a deep breath. "Barron, I think it's time I tell you what I've been holding back," she said softly, her hands fidgeting in her lap as she gathered the courage to continue. "There's something I never told anyone. Not even your family." Her voice trembled as she recounted a moment from years ago. "You were just a little boy, no older than 5. There was an accident in the house, something no one else noticed at the time. A gas leak." She paused, her breathing uneven. "I remember the smell, the fear that ran through me when I realized what could happen. You were in the living room, playing near the stove. I didn't even think. I just ran, grabbed you, and got us both out. Just before the fire started." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "It wasn't just the fire that changed me, Barron. It was the realization that I'd risk everything for you, without a second thought." Barron sat frozen, stunned, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy, inescapable truth. He tried to speak, but the lump in his throat wouldn't let him. Helen continued, her voice steadying. "I never told you, because I didn't want you growing up feeling like you owed me anything. You were just a child. None of it was your fault." She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I've carried that memory with me, every single day since." Barron swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. "Helen, you didn't just save my life. You shaped it. Everything I am today. It's because of the love and care you gave me." She reached for his hand then, her grip surprisingly firm. "And you've saved me now, Barron," Helen said, a faint smile touching her lips. But to Barron, those words only strengthened his resolve. He wasn't finished. Helen deserved more than just gratitude. She deserved a legacy. Weeks later, the grand ballroom of a Manhattan hotel buzzed with anticipation. The room was alive with journalists, philanthropists, and advocates, all gathered for an event that Barron had poured his heart into. At the center of it all stood Helen, poised beside him in an elegant navy dress. Her posture was both proud and humble as the spotlight fell upon her. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward to the microphone. The crowd hushed as her voice, steady yet thick with emotion, filled the space. "For a long time, I thought my story was over," she began. "But today I realize it was just the beginning." Helen opened up about her journey, sharing the hardships she had endured and the small glimmers of hope that had kept her moving forward. "The streets, they take everything from you, your home, your health, even your sense of self. But sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness to remind you of who you are." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I'm standing here today, not because of what I lost, but because someone chose to see me, when the world didn't." Her words hung in the air, raw, powerful, reaching into the hearts of everyone present. Then came the moment that changed everything. Stepping forward, Barron made an announcement that left the room in awe. The launch of Helen's Hope Foundation, a mission dedicated to providing housing, healthcare, and opportunities for those who, like Helen, had been overlooked and forgotten. The applause was thunderous. But Helen, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. This isn't just about me, she said, her voice breaking. It's about proving that compassion can change lives. Not just one, but many. As the event drew to a close, Helen and Barron stood side by side, watching as the crowd slowly dispersed. She turned to him, her expression soft, yet filled with certainty. You didn't just change my life, Barron. You reminded me of the person I was always meant to be. He smiled, his heart full. And you reminded me of what really matters, he replied. As they stepped into the crisp night air, Helen's story of resilience and redemption had become more than just her own. It had transformed into a beacon of hope for so many others. If this story resonated with you in any way, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your words matter to us. And if you found inspiration in Helen's journey, be sure to subscribe to Alex's Stories for more uplifting tales that truly make a difference. Your support helps us spread messages that matter. Together, let's inspire change, one small action at a time. Join us on this journey of hope and transformation.